contribution to creating a safer future for our neighborhood. Lithuania is actively engaging with other frontline democracies worldwide and under threat from authoritarian regimes. We exchange our experience and reinforce democratic resilience, promote global dialogue about new threats to democracy. As Lithuania's contribution to the Summit of Democracies process initiated by US President Biden, Lithuania since 2021 is convening the annual high-level forum on the future of democracy. This year it will take place on 7th and 8th of November. This forum provides a platform for the international community, governments, and democracy activists to discuss the state of play and efforts needed on building resilience of democracies against authoritarian regimes. The future and the state of democracy in Europe will depend on our ability to find values-based solutions and respond to all emergencies and threats. One of the key actions, investing in defense and civilian readiness. This year, we celebrate 20 years of our NATO membership. Poland celebrates 25th anniversary, and Poland was already 5 years member of NATO when we joined it, and we appreciate very much its support. We remember very clearly the strong support and are very grateful for that. So, and also the alliance itself celebrates its 75th anniversary. And of course, NATO remains the cornerstone of our security. We must improve alliance's defense and deterrence posture on the eastern flank and adopt a 360-degree approach. We hope that at the NATO summit in Washington, allies will announce the transition to new regional defense plans. In Washington, we must go beyond the Vilnius language and cement the irreversibility of Ukraine's membership. Along with NATO, a strong transatlantic link and close cooperation with the United States are pillars of our security and also security and support of our democratic values. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Bardzo pani dziękujemy.
Thank you very much. Now I have a last question to the panelists, and then I'd like to open the floor to you, ladies and gentlemen. The discussion we've had so far and the opening of the panel by distinguished panelists has led us in very diverse directions. The topics can be seen as a very ideological conversation on security and on transatlantic cooperation, democracy, who we are, but also to the things that are very pertinent for us in our daily life. But before I open the floor to you, I would like to ask Mr. Radomski from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We talked a lot about human rights. We heard the names Bucha and Irpin. Russia's aggression on Ukraine presents many challenges for human rights. And I have a question. How is Poland operating at the level of United Nations and other multilateral fora to meet the challenges? Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, it's an honor to be at this important conference in the Senate. Thank you very much on behalf of all of us for organizing this important event. I would like to briefly say that this event is a good moment to think about how NATO is related to human rights. NATO is associated with security policies, associated with defense and the use of force as a last resort, but in its core, it has a mission to defend the community of democratic nations who observe the fundamental rights, individual liberties and human rights. And this community of states that are faithful to democracy is the point of the existence of NATO. Looking at the role of Poland with regard to the special circumstances and the special threat, which is Russia's aggression on Ukraine, I would like to briefly, and I hope pretty systemically, say how in international organizations we are working with our partners. I'd like to start with the UN General Assembly in New York. From the very beginning of the all-out war, the General Assembly has been adopting resolutions that clearly define the situation. It is very important to plainly and clearly say that Russia is an aggressor, that it is violating key principles of the law, and it's trampling human rights. And these resolutions, there were 6 of them, they have all been adopted by a vast majority of the member states. Over 140 countries supported these important resolutions, also with regard to international norms. Also in the Human Rights Council, Poland is taking the floor in New York whenever it's possible in order to remind us all who is the aggressor and to say no to Russia's disinformation. Russia is using its status as the member of the Security Council to present a false narrative. So opposing Russia's lies is our obligation. The body that in the UN system is playing a key role is the Human Rights Council in Geneva. It's part of the United Nations system. And the Council, right after Russia's aggression on Ukraine, has not only adopted resolutions, but it also created mechanisms that are to register and record hard proof of what's happening in Ukraine, how Russia is breaking human rights. There is an independent investigative committee for crimes in Ukraine. Poland has supported the establishment of this commission and similar measures adopted by the Council of Europe. The OECE, which is operating from Vienna, was also able to use similar measures to monitor but also to document the violations of human rights. It is important. It leaves a trace that in the future will be used to secure the accountability of the perpetrators. We cannot forget about it. And a third organization from the European background, second after the OSCE, the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, which was able to establish a mechanism to document the losses caused by Russia's aggression. This is a special solution. The Council of Europe has proven very effective here, and this register, where Poland is represented by Professor Mężykowska, is already up and running. And I think that is the first tangible mechanism that is launching the process. It builds the documentation for cases that will then be looked at by the tribunal that will bring the perpetrators to justice in the future. Poland and the Council of Europe has excluded Russia in March 2022. And I think this was an important symbolic and political gesture with a strong support of Poland. We congratulate Lithuania on the current presidency in the current Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. I'd like to conclude my address by mentioning the role of the civil society. Without civil society, our decisions, declarations, resolutions, or conferences would not be reflected in the actual life of the general public. We know that it's the general public, it's civil society are changing reality. And I'd like to issue a signal that recognizing the importance of civil society, the Minister of Foreign Affairs has reinstated the Solidarity Award named after Lech Wałęsa. The prize was established in 2014. Then there was a pause of several years, and now it has been reinstated as a gesture of recognition for those organizations. This year, the decision will be announced in the autumn, but the organizations that are doing their utmost to cope with Russian aggression will be considered and will be recognized. I will pause here. Thank you very much.
Dziękujemy bardzo za przedstawienie tego.
So thank you very much for giving us an insight into what is happening in other international organizations. And right now, I would like to encourage you to make a contribution to our discussion. Perhaps there are some questions you'd like to ask. Bartek Kot. I understand I can ask questions in Polish. Yes, thank you, Marta. I think we all agree that democracy means that you know how to manage the country, you know how to manage safety and security, that state structures are foreseeable in democracy. But I'll ask a question related to the topic of our conference, because the biggest challenge today in terms of NATO and let's talk about the universe of Western values in general. In order to be effective and efficient, security-wise, very often we have to form alliances and talk to countries which are not democratic or are not stable democracies. For example, there is a huge debate sweeping the UK, and David Lammy has recently published an article where he laid out the pillars of foreign policy of the Labour Party, and his buzzword is progressive realism. Well, the policy will be progressive because it's Labour, but in international relations it will have to be realistic, what means that there will be no consistency of values. And, you know, it doesn't have to be a priority because probably Labour voters are living in a bubble, and Labour government will have to get out beyond the bubble. In the context of war in Ukraine, sometimes it's very problematic for us to liaise and have contacts and talk to global South countries. For example, when we communicate values that underpin our democracies, we have to make sure we are on the same page. And I'm talking about Western European countries with a colonial past. It's very difficult for them to do that, because if they are to convey such values, it may be problematic. when they are discussing, for example, different issues with African countries. And Poland could be an apt replacement and be the positive advocate of Western values during discussions with the global South, because we don't have a colonial past. So my question is, the way we perceive the world today through the conflict between democracies and autocracies, this is how it was framed by President Biden. Wouldn't it be best to show this conflict as a rivalry of countries that are trying to maintain the status quo, rules-based international order, and countries that are trying to question and undermine international order? When we look at this division, our allies will not include democratic countries, and autocratic countries will not always be our opponents, because some of them may be interested in challenging the status quo, international status quo. For example, India is very much interested in joining the Security Council of the United Nations. And recently we've had an example how we've lost Vietnam. We missed it on our radar, and Vietnam has initiated very complex relations with China, and before that it was a powerful ally helping us to fend off China in Asia-Pacific region. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is a vital perspective, and this point should be a part of our discussion. I don't know, did you address your question specifically to someone, or is it anyone? No, we have a representative of the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so I would like to find out how we are embracing it in our foreign policy. So a question to Mr. Radomski. A question, you know, painted in a very broad brush, I would say. And it touches on a much wider debate that has been continued for years in spite of escalation of conflicts worldwide. What we are witnessing in recent years, not only in Ukraine, but also in the Middle East. So your proposal to discuss order driven by rules-based order, so order based on rules, without defining those rules, makes us more flexible. It enables us to seek for partnership with countries that are not on the first line when we think of allies. And there is a huge risk embedded in that. When we are building an alliance, the rules and the interpretation of rules, interpretation of some leading world players may be strikingly different from our definition. And what do we risk, in a way, is that we are going to undermine our foundations, our values, including democracy and human rights. So discussions, legal discussions about human rights, I don't want to point my finger to countries that we are in conflict with. But such discussions are putting us in a challenging situation, because we need to look up to democratic values, which are our moral compass, which are our link with other countries. I know it sounds very generic, but to touch on historical context and colonialism, Poland is not shying away from the role of a partner who could communicate with countries affected by colonialism, African countries or the global south. And I think a great example is an address given by Minister Sikorski on the 23rd of February this year, a day before the second anniversary of Russian aggression on Ukraine. And he referred to the position of Kenya, to the position of Kenyan ambassador to the UN, who said that the cost of building stability in this post-colonial world was to accept a compromise by African countries who wanted to put peace and stability above national values. They found courage to accept a compromise, to consolidate peace. And African countries were ready at the time to build the new order, and they still are, what has been noticed at the General Assembly. And I would stop here. Thank you very much for your answer. And now over to General Rożański. I have a question to all panelists. And I do hope it's not going to be a troublesome question, because we have come together today to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the North Atlantic Treaty. And we have mentioned the UN or the EU a number of times today, and I have a question which may sound provocative, just like the previous question, but the foundation of UN is the UN Charter. We have mentioned the Washington Treaty today. The EU has its own Lisbon Treaty. The EU, in this trio, is the youngest body, but discussions continue on whether the EU should be operating differently, and this may lead us to major changes and amendments to the Lisbon Treaty. But let me comment on NATO and the EU and the Charter and the Treaty. The UN, the founding fathers, when they said that 5 permanent members have the right to veto, they probably assumed that 5 world powers will be striving for peace, whereas the year 2022 proved that one of the members does not respect the Charter. And in this case, Russia is able to veto any resolution, any UN resolution that is designed to help victims of the war. So we are talking about the Tropic of Cancer. And is NATO going to be open to all countries that embrace democracy? So a very simple question. Do you think there is time for us to start talking on improving treaties or the UN Charter, to make foundations, to make those documents more flexible, to make sure that those documents do not stand in the way of democracy? And would such initiative be far too bold if it was suggested by a country like Poland? It's a very challenging question, but it combines our discussion about the Global South and the different perspective. And who would like to try to answer this question first? I didn't want to make any trouble.
I don't have the good answer, but I will say something, which is what we diplomats usually do when we don't have a good answer. But and Pavel, definitely being a specialist of UN, will be able to answer better. But there has been for many, many years the process of reform of UN Security Council, and also Estonia prefers a reform of Security Council so that the changes in the world would be reflected in the composition of the Security Council also, because there are new emerging powers that are completely out of Security Council. That's one thing, and the second thing, obviously, it is a big problem if one of the members of Security Council is the aggressor. But then, on the other hand, we also probably don't want to go to the direction of League of Nations, where you just become so democratic that the whole organization ceases to exist, because if you exclude those countries that are basically the pillars of keeping some sort of balance between the different interests. Throughout the history, countries have cooperated based on interests. The fact that we have this value-based cooperation in NATO, in EU, is kind of a new thing, actually, and it's a good thing. So having served in Global South, to Part's very complicated question, I will say that that all the elements that you touched upon are important, but none of them alone makes a sea change. So Poland going and stressing that you should listen to us because we have not been a colonial power, it's a good narrative to present, but it will not convince the Global South, obviously, because talk is cheap, money matters, and the fact that we are from Europe also puts us in the group of the countries who share this collective guilt of colonialism on one hand, and then on the other hand, it's still the policy is transactional in that sense that from our side, our life is easier and better if more countries behave like us, very clear. And for the Global South, the main objective is to have economic cooperation, to have relatively enhanced movement of people, and all these sort of things. So there are ways we can cooperate, we can contribute, but we shouldn't expect miracles from some sort of policy narratives that we can put forward, which in itself may not be a bad narrative to stress that we have not been a colonial power and that the war that Russia is waging right now is a clearly colonial war. But it has to be a complex answer, and it takes a lot of effort. It's not that you just make one visit to Tanzania and then they will, all of a sudden, they will see the light and do it differently. It's not going to happen. Thank you.
Czy ktoś z Państwa jeszcze chciałby spróbować coś powiedzieć? Tak.
Okay, so would anyone else would like to comment? Okay, so very briefly, because I think it was Mark Brzezinski in his speech who said that constitution may be revised every 25 years. And if so, We can also think about the revision of fundamental documents, but that requires specific conditions. We need experts' know-how because we don't want to let the gin out of the bottle. And about the Global South, we should not close ourselves to have an insight into conflicts and wars that are unfolding in Africa. Instead of wondering why Africa is not supporting us, because there is such tragedy happening in Ukraine, we need to realize that we need to pay more attention to what is happening in Africa. And if I may, about the review of the Constitution of the UN Charter every 25 years, it would be interesting because the current debate or negotiations on the reform of the Security Council, there is a group, there is a cross-governmental group for negotiations which was established back in the 90s. So the group itself has been operating for more than a quarter century, and it's unable to reach an agreement because of aspirations of key players who expect permanent membership. So Poland is actively contributing to this debate, and we are highlighting that we need to make a bigger contribution as a region, bigger contribution to the Security Council. But how to boost the efficiency of these discussions? Well, it's hard to say. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And one more question, and then we are going to wrap up this panel.
Dzień dobry Państwu, Agata
Kleczkowska, the Institute of Legal Sciences of the Polish Academy of Sciences. I'd like to ask about the relations between NATO and the EU. After the escalation of military conflict in Ukraine, the EU has started developing its capability in terms of defense and military affairs. But we also know that the EU has been founded as an economic organization. On the other hand, people say that if the Republican candidate wins in the US presidential elections, Europe will have to fare by itself in terms of collective defense against external threats. So developing the military capability of the EU is important. Article 42 of the Treaty on the European Union, the collective self-defense in EU treaties, is even stronger in than Article 5 of NATO. What is your view of the relations between the EU and NATO? Should the EU focus on economic issues and NATO focus on military issues? Or should these competences be intertwined? Perhaps this should be cooperation or rivalry. The question about the development of EU's defense aspects is ongoing. How do you reconcile these two points of view, the two organizations and their competences? Would anyone like to volunteer and take this question? Thank you, Ambassador.
It would be strange to sit here and not to say anything, right? Obviously, there are a number of things. First is that the important thing to notice that the EU and NATO membership is overlapping more and more. Therefore, the EU and NATO cooperation should become easier in the future and more structured. We, in Estonia, we think that it's a very good thing to have better cooperation, but not too much duplication. Some duplication has to be there anyway, but not too much. Your question was also hinting towards the idea of having a defense commissioner, which we think is a good idea, in order to highlight the needs to restart the European production of military equipment. And it's important to do it as fast as possible. Therefore, also, if there is a new post, it should be given enough power to do something and also enough budget to do something. So we will have to see at the merits what will be on the table. But as an idea, it seems to be a good one and reasonable one. Where I would have a little bit of issue with your statement, the Article 42.7, which sort of states something that countries will do something in order to help each other, it is not stronger than NATO Article 5. It is not stronger, because what makes Article 5 strong is, first of all, the transatlantic link, but even more importantly, that there are actual plans. These plans are being rehearsed. These plans are being populated by capabilities. You have a permanent structure, permanent exercises, all sorts of things that in EU do not exist. So you may declare a nice thing, but if you don't have things to deliver it, it doesn't work. So there, from my point of view, there is no competition. And if you look at the 42.7, it was mostly meant for a little bit different kind of crises than the actual military confrontation, which is the essence of Article 5. So there is a complementarity, not that much competition, and lately I think both organizations have been finding much better way to cooperate than 5 years ago even, so it's going in a good direction, I think. Thank you.
Dziękujemy serdecznie.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for asking questions. Thank you to the panelists for trying to reply to difficult questions. It is very difficult to summarize, but I think I'd like to say that democracy and security, it is a pillar of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The people sit in completely different institutions. There are those in charge of democracy and there are those in charge of defense. It's not something that is mentioned at the same time in our daily work. So it's a good opportunity that we had the time and place to talk about it. In organizations such as the UN, there are those who do not support resolutions condemning Russia's aggression. As a result, we should think about how we can cooperate with the countries that have a different point of view so that we can try to convince them to our point of view and to expand our cooperation with them. Thank you very much, and over to the next panel. Thank you very much.
We would like to welcome you to a coffee break before we begin the next panel. Thank you for your patience so far. We shall meet at 12:30. Zapraszamy Państwa.
Please take your seats. We are going to follow up on our discussion. And coming up next is the second panel of today's conference, entitled The Evolution of Modern War and the Mechanisms of Civilian Democratic Control over Defense. So our panelists include the Ambassador of Canada to Poland, Katrina Den, Ambassador Tomasz Chłoń, the Plenipotentiary of the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Combating International Disinformation, Colonel and Deputy Commander of Poland's Cyberspace Defense Forces, Jacek Rychlica, and representatives of the academia, Dr. Agata Kleczkowska of the Institute of Law of the Polish Academy of Science, and Dr. Łukasz Wyszyński of the Institute of International Relations at the Naval Academy in Gdynia. So thank you very much for accepting the invitation to join our discussion. Organizers of this panel wanted to talk about civilian and democratic control over the armed forces in the context of the division of power, respect for the human right and for the civic rights, which form the foundation of modern democratic states that follow the rule of law. And they provide citizens with the guarantee that their rights will be respected, what underpins the national defense. In the run-up to NATO summit in Washington, that all member states, the summit will definitely put the spotlight on Ukraine in the context of transatlantic cooperation in the area of security. And there are new threats to security that have emerged recently. These are threats that were not contemplated quarter century ago, and the scale was very different than in the past, when the Community of Democracies was established. I would like to ask Madam Ambassador to have a short opening speech.
Tak. Dzień dobry. It's wonderful to be here with you today. It's a real pleasure. I'm delighted that this day harnesses the diversity and the cross-regional membership of the COD with an interface on security. The diverse group of countries that are member of the Communities of Democracies is a wonderful asset. And it should always be harnessed to maintain and enhance the dialogue, ensure we don't speak to echo chambers. So as Mirosław was just explaining, our next panel is really dedicated to the evolution of modern warfare and the mechanisms of civilian control over defense. The panel offers us an opportunity to reconcile the topics of interests and values. Security is in our interest, and democracy is in our interests. In my view, we tend to put democracy on one side, and the panel though, in my view, we tend to put democracy on one side in the value category, and security on the other side in the interests category. It should not be so. I believe that they are both. It is on our interests to protect our values and vice versa. Democracy is, of course, most visible at the ballot box, but democracy is an arc. It lives before, during, and after voting day. This is why universal human rights and the rule of law are intrinsic components of democracy. And this is why they're worth fighting for. The deterrence and protection provided by NATO are also values, just like democracy and its components. In these very difficult times, we all agree that democracy is worth safeguarding. But war is taking new forms that require new solutions. The topic of this upcoming panel is therefore very relevant. Dear panelists, you're being asked to help us think through whether democratic states are better prepared for war, if democracies can win, how civilian control over defense impacts on state security, and how allies can best collaborate in this new warfare. Foreign threat actors are using disinformation and other techniques of information to target democratic institutions and processes, fundamental freedoms, and defense system. Most of us, I'm sure, share the deep concern that some states are indeed employing these techniques to erode democracy and sow divisions between citizens and allies. Combating such state-sponsored disinformation is the idea behind the creation of the G7 rapid response mechanism established in 2018 by G7 leaders to strengthen coordination, identify, and respond to threats to democracy. Canada is honored to coordinate G7 countries on an ongoing basis and indeed collaborate with NATO in this spirit. Let me add that we very much welcome Poland's focus on security online, including its most recent announcement on the reinforcement of its cybersecurity. I hope this will be one of the issues we will hear about in the context of this upcoming discussion. I look forward to what I'm sure will be a very interesting.
Thank you very much. Panie ambasadorze, chciałabym...
Mr. Ambassador, my first question is addressed to you. You were the head of NATO Information Office in Moscow, in Russia, in a country which has masterminded different scandals, which had definitely been involved in disinformation campaigns implemented in the US in triggering social unrest in Europe. Disinformation has become a widespread tool to destabilize and undermine the situation. And now, especially in the cyberspace, disinformation is unprecedented. What do you believe is the key for effective cooperation in this area, and what should we focus at? Thank you very much for inviting me. It's true that I was the head of NATO Moscow office, but I was overseeing it from Brussels for 3.5 years. What is the key when we are talking about countering disinformation? I think a lot has been said about it today during the previous panel from Minister Henryka Mościcka-Dendys. And if I was to recap what has been said in one sentence, I would say strong democracy is the key. It's vital in terms of combating disinformation. And the Scandinavian countries are the showcase of successes in fighting disinformation. All of them are examples of robust democracies driven by education in a wide sense, not only media education. And those countries have introduced into their school curricula, even in preschool education, they have introduced elements of media education, critical thinking. They are teaching young children and teenagers how to identify misinformation. So education is the key. raising awareness is equally essential, and it's a whole system that should be built and reinforced. It should be built upon a strategy to counter disinformation. We need legal regulations. We need cooperation with NGOs. That's essential. And perhaps most important of all is cooperation with the civil society and NGOs. And this is exactly what we do, what we want to do at the ministry. We want to establish a board for developing resilience to disinformation. But because we are visiting the Polish Senate, I wanted to stress one thing. Another pillar of strong democracies are free and powerful media, including the public media. Not a long time ago, we had an issue with combating disinformation for some reasons. And when I mention potential solutions that we may implement to follow the examples of Scandinavian countries, for example, there are public media where supervisory boards are composed mainly of representatives of NGOs, while the presence of politicians, government officials, representatives related to current government should not exceed 30%. So I'm very happy that I can remind you that such solutions have been put in place in other countries, in this very building. And another essential thing I often reiterate, a certain stage of analyzing what disinformation is has come to an end. We have mapped threats, let it be Iranian, Russian, or Chinese threats. And mapping should now enable us to launch an offensive, to introduce sanctions, and this is what is happening. We are lagging a bit behind in the EU, but nevertheless, we have introduced the 14th sanction package. And when we talk about very specific things, that means that we are determined to counter everything that is happening in the global south, where we are losing our disinformation battle. And it's a paradox, because we as democracies, as the collective West, we have much bigger combined resources, despite the fact that Russia is spending a small fortune on propaganda. And Rosja Sivodnia, this umbrella organization which is managing Sputnik and all media related to the regime, its budget is 3 times smaller than that of our public television, but nevertheless, we are much more affluent than Russia. We have resources that we are able to tap into in a much more effective and coordinated manner to interplay with other countries in the West to arrive at an effective division of responsibilities. For example, we have efficient embassies. We have representations of the EU. And we can share the workload much more effectively to combat disinformation, and we can respond in a much more efficient and coordinated manner. And this is what we want to advocate for during Polish presidency. And another conflict I would like to mention is Moldova. Currently, we have a situation where we want to avoid the Georgian scenario in Moldova. And it seems to us that we have a story to tell, that we have a narrative as the EU that should be communicated to Moldovans before the EU referendum and before the presidential elections. We have an exciting narrative about Poland, about the EU. We have a Moldovan minority in Poland, 40,000 people, and many of them has made their stay in Poland a success. So we can use their voices, we can use the voices of Polish Moldovans to tell our narrative, to counter this aggressive disinformation Russia will be amplifying before October this year. So the group that was established, and I would like to thank Canada because we have a Canadian expert who will be working in the group combating disinformation in Ukraine, will be reaching an agreement on different shared projects for Moldova. And now, Agata Kleczkowska, you are a lawyer, so I have to ask about the Polish constitution. And Article 26 of the Polish constitution provides that the Polish armed forces are neutral in terms of politics, but are subject to civil control. In recent days, NGOs and the media and citizens are asking multiple questions to the government about how the armed forces and different units are defending national borders. So is this civil and democratic control over the defense sector? And we have a very specific political and historical context. So are those questions facilitating or perhaps making efficient safety and security management even more difficult? Thank you very much for this question. Let's first discuss Article 26, Section 2. Civil control is control exercised by an external body, non-military body, whereas democratic control refers to the political mandate that authorizes performance of such control, because only democratic entities, not organizational structures, are entitled to perform such control. So these are elected bodies, so the parliament, the Polish president, but this right is also vested to the Council of Ministers and its members. So they have a direct democratic mandate. Article 194, Section 2 of the institution mentions that the Minister of Defense exercises control on behalf of the Polish president. So control activities go beyond site visits and controls. They include legal regulations, all statuses relevant to the armed forces, identifying basic principles of operations, budgeting, or development of military doctrine. Such control is essential to ensure compliance with the rule of law, human rights, and to make sure that the armed forces perform their basic obligations. Civil and democratic controls are an inherent element of the constitutional system, including the principle that the Republic of Poland is a shared good, that it's a democratic state, that democratic bodies operate within the limits of the law. tying rules and regulations applicable to the armed forces with the Constitution provides a guarantee that armed forces, despite their different status, are not alienated but are subject to the same rules like other entities and units of the state, what means that they will not become autonomous, but they will serve the state. On the other hand, the civil and democratic control over the armed forces means that the legislator or an entity having control over the armed forces may not use forces for other purposes than those specified by the Constitution. So, to respond directly to your question whether civil and democratic control is an essential element in a democratic state of law, it is an element which brings together the armed forces with other governing bodies of the state. So it's an element sine qua non of a democratic state. And this is how this form of control should be evaluated from the perspective of the law. Perhaps the military perspective looks different, especially if it goes beyond its constitutional framework to use the army for political purposes, but that stands in conflict with provisions of the Polish constitution.
Skoro o siłach zbrojnych mowa, jest z nami pan...
We have with us Colonel Jacek Rychlica, who is the acting deputy commander of the Poland's cyberspace defense forces component. I think that most of Polish citizens have no awareness of the existence of such forces in Poland, although having a cyberspace defense strategy is a must for the country. It's not a voluntary move. What should the armed forces, what rights should they have in peacetime, during crisis time, and during a time of war with regard to operations in cyberspace? This is a very broad question. Let me start by thanking the organizers for the invitation to this conference. It is very important from the point of view of understanding what we are dealing with. Due to the development of this cyber domain and the fact that it is being exploited contrary to our expectations. You put it rightly that perhaps not many people are aware of the existence of the cyberspace defense forces component. It's been established in 2022. And I think we have a problem in answering the question how it should operate. Because right now we are seeing how dynamic the cyberspace domain is, and we're facing many emerging challenges and threats in this domain. In terms of the powers and rights of cyberspace defense forces, what actions should be taken by military structures in peacetime primarily. I think we should be aware of the fact that there is no peace in cyberspace. In the US, they say that peacetime in cyberspace is about competition. They call it a competition phase. So in that time, all actors are active. And the problem is that our systems are constantly being monitored, scanned by partners who are not always friendly. So if we want to be able to protect our national interests, we need to build a strong and resilient set of structures. Part of them are armed forces. If the armed forces are to effectively operate in cyberspace in the competition phase, we already should be able to compete with our adversaries in cyberspace. A big problem here is this perception of cyberspace as something similar that we have had until now. In the armed forces themselves, there is this approach to conducting operations in cyberspace similarly to operations in physical space. So basically this assumes that cyber command should operate the same way as the land forces, the army command. But in cyberspace, you cannot do that in many situations. So we have a lot of experience as people in all sorts of conflicts in real life, particularly I'm talking about thousands of years of experience in land warfare. But even in this domain, we are seeing the emergence of new capabilities. For example, we already have over 100 years experience in fighting wars in the air. The problem is that even if we look at the constitution, the Polish constitution says that the armed forces are supposed to look after the borders of the country. But in cyberspace, you do not have any borders. So how do you protect the country in cyberspace? Well, you can do that through cooperation with allies. It is essential to change the paradigm of operations. For many years, I served in one of the military intelligence services, and we were told that our information should be protected, especially the important that is relevant for national security. We were operating on the need-to-know basis, but in cyberspace, we have to change the paradigm to need to share. Because what we're seeing in our systems these days is probably happening elsewhere in the systems of our allies. So the ability of international cooperation becomes a must-have for us. Without this international cooperation, we are losing capabilities. And that's one of the key aspects that have to be considered. One other important thing with regard to cyberspace and how it is perceived and how we are to protect the national interests. It does not apply to the armed forces as such, but in business, if you go to the senior management of a company and we propose that they implement cybersecurity solutions, they are treated by the senior management of a company as money poorly spent. Why? Because if they invest in a new product line, if they invest in new buildings or a new production plant, the effects are tangible. when you invest in cybersecurity, you don't see tangible results. Perhaps if you don't invest, the results would be there for all to see. But it's very difficult to talk about prevention and looking after cybersecurity. And the role of the armed forces here is that the armed forces well, we have the cyberspace defense forces component. We are also the provider of skilled staff. Business pays a bit more than the military is able to pay such experts. But these people are still working for our joint security, even if they leave the military. I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but the question was very broadly defined. But I was trying to provide at least partially some answers to your question. Thank you very much. Dr. Łukasz Wyszyński, you represent the Naval Academy, which was established in 1922, with a seat in Toruń, interestingly, because Gdynia did not exist at the time. One of the reasons for the establishment of the Naval Academy was that at the end of 1919, at the Department for Naval Affairs, a 10-year naval program was developed, which addressed the threat from Bolshevik Russia. And we're meeting here over 100 years later, and the Russian threat continues to be pertinent. In your opinion, democratic states in the 21st century, are they better prepared to conduct and win wars in different areas, or maybe countries should reorientate their doctrine since much of the operations has switched to cyberspace? What should we be doing? Thank you very much for this question. Well, I could address your initial lead to the question, but we don't have the time, so I'll switch and stick to the question. Karl von Clausewitz, in one of his many thoughts, said that war doesn't belong to the world of art or science. It is a social phenomenon. And this is a reply to that question, in a way. What the Colonel said, as people over centuries, we assign values to specific ways of communication, behavior, attitudes, to material things as well. So domains of our activity are becoming valuable to us, and if they are valuable, we want to protect them. So we securitize these domains. And we heard it in the first part of today's conference. Fukuyama talked about the end of history. It seemed when he was saying that we all are faithful to democracy, that we cooperate with one another, that we enjoy the benefits of liberal economy. But since it's not true, there are tensions on the global arena. These tensions are becoming visible, but they have been there before. So why do we have confrontation between individual countries? Well, it shows what is valuable to us. If we have introduced, as the Colonel said, for some time, we have introduced armed forces that operate in cyberspace, it means that sometime before we decided that it's valuable, that it needs to be protected, and we identified that this will be a field of rivalry, of competition. And airspace has not been a domain that we wanted to control and protect. We wanted to be present there, and we wanted to take control away from our adversaries. We have Tomasz Szubrycht, Admiral. I wanted to mention the naval domain, because here you could say that the world today, as a community of democratic states, we're talking about NATO, the European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, these are countries that most of their affluence, living standards, most of it comes from naval trade, from maritime trade. Logistics, the movement of people, goods, exports, imports, energy, resources. It all depends on whether we can ship them, whether we can protect maritime transport, whether in times of crisis we'll be able to prevent rogue states from having access to the seas. I think we're all looking at what's happening in the Red Sea, the competition in the South or East China Seas, the Baltic. Of course, NATO has expanded, and the Baltic is also becoming a multi-domain area, a multi-domain combat. Well, it's not about whether the state and its armed forces should be present in a specific domain. These days, wars, because of the complexity of social structures, the wars are also very complex and they are multi-domain. When we are looking at what's happening in Ukraine, we are all aware that what is most visible to the general public, to the media, is the kinetic warfare. But war in cyberspace is also very relevant because this is information war. When you look at the Gerasimov doctrine, you can find many aspects that say that you can do much more when you work through information, and as a result, kinetic warfare is more effective. So cyberspace is very relevant. I think that the states these days have to operate and protect our values both in the physical world but also in the digital world, in cyberspace. So the states need to have the right tools to react and to protect their interests. And the last thing, I wanted to refer to what Tomasz Chłoń, Ambassador Tomasz Chłoń was talking about. This is an important issue about how we should educate the general public. We are able to build systems, we are able to build specialized units, but for them to be effective, they need to have the right level of awareness among the general public. The general public needs to be aware of threats. To take the example of military universities. I represent the Naval Academy, but there's more of them. We need to train professionals for the armed forces. And these new members of staff should be able to respond to known and unknown threats. But perhaps we should be preparing experts for the general public to educate the people about what kind of an infosphere we are all living in. Because our biggest competitive advantage, the democratic values, the Republican form of government, the ability to criticize, to evaluate, to elect the authorities, is also our soft spot. So in order to protect this soft spot, the general public should have the necessary skills related to the critical assessment of information. This, of course, implies that there are many challenges, but we need to educate the people in security, in social issues, and political issues. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. I will make a very brief comment. On purpose, we have diplomats, scientists, and the military on this panel. Why? Because this sphere, this area, is not only relevant to one group. Only interplay between you is able to multiply our capabilities. So I would like to thank you for exchange of opinions, and I would like to open our Q&A session, and I encourage everyone to join our discussion. Would anyone like to contribute to our discussion? And please introduce yourself. Mateusz Matążek, social activist. I'm an engineer. I'm a software engineer, so I'm very happy that we are discussing cybersecurity today, which is very relevant, and this is a topic we need to address. So my question about the social media, because our panelists have mentioned how important it is to combat disinformation in the social media. So my question to the Colonel, what do you think about open source software to make the code clear and transparent to the wide public, so we know how algorithms work, so we will be ready for defense and for offensive operations as well. And if we want to keep democracy alive, we need to switch to offensive operations. I was called out, and I think that first of all, running an offensive at this stage of competition is the key, is pivotal. I don't think that democratic countries are very keen to opt for such activities for many different reasons and in relation to different adversaries, because offensive operations are defined as measures that generate results not only in cyberspace but also outside the cyberspace. So it is an element of power projection. So such capabilities are a must. We need to have them. But how to make the most of them and how to use them, we need to be very careful and very cautious. But you have touched on something else. Whether software codes should be available to the wide public or not. Well, each and every solution has its strengths and benefits. Open source software as a concept is very useful because it allows many people to analyze a code which is used for certain functions. So entire communities are able to analyze and improve the code, and theoretically, as a result, we can feel safer, because there will be more people who are developing the code, who are evaluating the code and possibly improving it, making tweaks and adjustments. And it's also an easier way, especially for private people, to use the code, because as long as the code is not a paid code, free software may be used by anyone. The problem is even the largest group of experts is not able to pinpoint all vulnerabilities of free software. So especially in vulnerable systems, if you are using open source software, it's not very safe because hackers may find new vulnerabilities to break the code and violate the system. So open source software, definitely yes, but in critical systems, we need to take care of our interests and use software which is very effectively validated and deemed safe. Well, as time goes by, it may be open software, but states, most of them, especially in their own networks, they prefer to use their original software, especially in terms of cryptography, because such original software is not shared with anyone else, and I think this is the optimum solution. I don't know if that was the point of your question. Yes, definitely, you have answered it. I wanted to focus on social media to ensure transparency, and talking about critical infrastructure. Yes, we need to be cautious, but we need to build a strategy addressing social media tycoons, because we either ban certain social media democratic countries or we are adopting a different approach. So yes, that was the point of my question.
Dziękuję ślicznie.
Okej. Panie ambasadorze.
Mr. Ambassador. Hello, Robin Barnett.
Almost has said, and I strongly agree with all the points made about disinformation, although I would add, if only it was only Russia that did disinformation, everything would be a lot simpler and more straightforward. However, my issue is this. During the Cold War, we had all the simple and easy phrases, like freedom, like democracy. We did not need to get into complicated discussion and debate. Today, in my opinion, and I think not just mine, we have a huge problem, which is that people do not want to listen to complicated answers to difficult problems. People want sound bites. In the world, it seems to me that we are at an enormous disadvantage, because in the world of a soundbite, speaking at length about both sides of an argument has meant that you've lost a large part on how, in the world of the soundbite, those of us who believe there are very few simple answers to complex questions might begin to change the narrative in our favor. Thank you.
Szanowni Państwo, mam 3 pytania. One są takie dedykowane personalnie do panelistów, którym serdecznie dziękuję za przyjęcie zaproszenia. Pani Agato, jeżeli Pani pozwoli, to świat nauki chciałbym zapytać, może trochę prowokacyjnie, bo jak rozdzielić albo jak zapewnić tą cywilną kontrolę nad armią, a jak armię chronić przed politykami, to wyraziłem w takim krótkim artykule, który jest przed Państwem, także jak będziecie mieli chwilę czasu, to można poznać moje stanowisko. Ale czy nie uważa Pani, że swego rodzaju uprzedzenia, które może subiektywnie trochę odbieram w odniesieniu do byłych żołnierzy zawodowych, aby zaangażować ich w pracę administracji rządowej, co często się tłumaczy, że to naruszy cywilną kontrolę nad armią, co słyszeliśmy w wypowiedziach ekspertów, dziennikarzy, szczególnie w okresie kampanii wyborczej, nie jest jednak złą interpretacją właśnie tego pojęcia cywilnej kontroli nad armią. Czy mogłaby się Pani odnieść do tego?
I bardzo dziękuję za to pytanie. Tak, jak najbardziej zgadzam się, że to jest zdecydowanie zbyt szeroka interpretacja tego, czym ta kontrola cywilno-demokratyczna powinna być albo nie powinna być, ponieważ tutaj generalnie clou kontroli cywilno-demokratycznej jest to, żeby armia, pozostając w pewien sposób autonomiczną, nie była jednak zupełnie odizolowana od innych struktur władzy. Więc kwestia kompetencji i osób, które sprawują różne funkcje w różnych okresach, myślę, że w żaden sposób nie wpływa na wykonywanie tej kontroli cywilno-demokratycznej. Wprost przeciwnie, może dawać inną perspektywę i lepsze spojrzenie na wiele kwestii, które może tą kontrolę jeszcze bardziej wspomóc, uczynić jeszcze bardziej dopasowaną do potrzeb sił zbrojnych, a jednocześnie z tą perspektywą cywilno-demokratyczną.
Dziękuję bardzo. I tak trochę będzie korespondowało moje pytanie z kolei do pana Tomasza. Mówi się o tym, że gwarancją funkcjonowania państwa demokratycznego jest zachowanie trójpodziału władzy, który może z pewnymi modyfikacjami w większości krajów demokratycznych jest zachowany i jest przestrzegany. Mówi się też o tej czwartej władzy, co też uprzedmiało nawet w pytaniach trosce o media, żeby były wolne media, ale moje pytanie jest takie, czy aby zagwarantować ten taki faktyczny podział, ten trójpodział władzy, nie powinniśmy się zastanawiać, czy nie jest złym rozwiązaniem, że te same osoby są tak naprawdę uczestnikami władzy ustawodawczej i wykonawczej, że są parlamentarzystami, są jednocześnie członkami administracji rządowej i to kluczowej, podejmującej istotne decyzje. Czy Pana zdaniem to nie jest jednym z elementów, który zakłóca to funkcjonowanie państwa demokratycznego? Nawet te komentarze na bazie naszego kraju na przestrzeni lat czasem się, że tak powiem, jakoś zderzają i się używa określenia, że jakiś jest czas, że niedemokratycznie jest państwo zarządzane. Nie chcę tu się odnosić literalnie do poszczególnych ugrupowań politycznych, ale czy to moje pytanie nie jest dzisiaj może daleko idące, czy można warto się nad tym zastanowić?
Dziękuję panie generale za to pytanie i niektóre państwa już na to pytanie sobie odpowiedziały.
Tak.
I w momencie, kiedy politycy obejmują funkcje rządowe, muszą rezygnować z mandatów parlamentarnych. Tak jest między innymi w państwach nordyckich, tak jest w Estonii, więc no, chyba niezłe wzorce, panie generale. Natomiast jeszcze pozwolę sobie na pytanie poprzedników zwrócić uwagę na, padło pytanie o pewną strategię wobec mediów społecznościowych. Więc taka strategia w Unii Europejskiej jest. Ona nazywa się Akt o usługach cyfrowych. Jest to rozporządzenie, które w jakimś sensie dyscyplinuje tych potentatów w mediach społecznościowych do pewnej nie tylko już dobrowolnej, dobrowolnego kodeksu postępowania i wypełniania wynikających z takich dobrowolnych kodeksów obowiązków, ale do prawnie obowiązujących przepisów, które nakładają konieczność transparencji, między innymi podczas wyborów, oznaczania treści reklamowych, politycznych, zawierania informacji o tym, kto stoi za takimi reklamami, oznaczania treści, które są generowane przez sztuczną inteligencję poprzez odpowiednie oznakowanie itd., itd. I jest kwestia w tej chwili taka, że musimy to rozporządzenie skutecznie egzekwować. I pytanie jeszcze było jedno. I think the ambassador asked about the sound bites, how to deal with the sound bites, and I think that there are certain schools of education that favor a dialogue instead of monologue, that favor approach that, you listen to what the others have to say, and even if you disagree, you admit that perhaps there is a grain of truth in what you are saying. And that educational approach has been developed, and tested also in Poland, but on a very limited scale. But the idea is to get to the young people, adolescents, when their brain develops, and they learn how to interact with their counterparts. And the authors of this method call it interdemocracy, where your sound bites do not necessarily bite, but you try to explain and then reflect upon what the others have to say to you.
Dziękuję.
I skorzystam jeszcze może z prawa.
I have a question for my colleague, Karol, who had a pretty difficult mission because he had to talk about this new component of the armed forces which is being developed in Poland. But my question is as follows. When I read Article 26 of the Constitution, which talks about why we have the armed forces, now a new component is being developed, and the general message is that the armed forces should guarantee the security, inviolability of the territory, our borders, and this is about defense. It appears that it's about defense. And in cyberspace, as you mentioned, there are no borders in cyberspace, so it's hard to talk about when you have peace, when you have time of crisis or time of war. So should we talk about the fact that the new capabilities, this new component of the armed forces, well, perhaps it should be capable of preventively carrying out operations in peacetime. Kinetically, this would mean operating outside of borders. But since this is in cyberspace, there are no borders, so should we be able to conduct preventive operations in cyberspace? Well, I think it's one of the best questions I have heard. The truth is that cyberspace is different from physical, real-life domains in many aspects, in many ways. On the one hand, you have the article of the Constitution, Article 26, which says that in peacetime, the armed forces should only train, and that's it. But we are not living in a world which is completely safe. We're not isolated from other actors, and these actors are now very active. So if we approach this attitude, we are exposing ourselves to the threats that are constantly emerging. We will not be able to secure our interests in peacetime and in any other time. In this country, we are very much focused on the threat from the Russian Federation. The problem with the Russian Federation is that in line with Russia's strategy, there is no peacetime, conflict time, and preparation for the conflict time. We have to be aware of this strategy when we design our response, our security measures. And that is particularly relevant for cyberspace. We cannot be reactive. We cannot wait for a punch to be sent our way and then to protect ourselves, because then we would be a boxer trying to keep the guard up, but sooner or later the boxer would be hit. So we need to be more proactive. We need to try to predict the moves of our adversaries, the infrastructure, the tools, the techniques. We need to be able to respond to them. So in peacetime, a component of the military, that is the cyberspace defense forces, they should be able to work in cyberspace with a focus on prevention. I'm not talking about offensive actions, which is a production of force, but in cyberspace these days, most of the countries, maybe not all, but certainly most of the countries, they are very active in cyberspace, and we should not be lagging behind. Thank you very much, and I'd like to take the opportunity, since I have a microphone. I have a question for Dr. Łukasz Wyszyński. You said that you did not focus on the lead to my question, and you responded to the question itself. Now you can address the lead up to my question. Well, this, what I wanted to say ties in with what I already said. I did not want to be focusing or seen as focusing on naval issues only. If we look back in history, if we look at why Poland wanted to have access to the sea back at the beginning of the 20th century. The state had to have a vision, had to have an idea. We built, as a country, we built the port in Gdynia, which was a result of international geopolitical decisions, which prevented us from having access to Gdańsk. So we needed a university to train people to serve at sea. And by that I mean both the maritime trade and naval personnel. The Navy is there to protect the interests of the state. So we have broad access to the Baltic Sea. There are many Polish interests in the maritime areas, and this influences not just Poland, but it influences the situation that are international, the EU, NATO. So it is a sequence of conscious decisions to have military sources. First, you need to have the tools. In the media, we're talking about equipment and platforms, but what is key is personnel, training personnel, maintaining continuity, institutional continuity is very important. I'd like to refer to what the Colonel said. We cannot always be reactive. We need to be proactive in those domains where this is essential. What happened in the interwar period, due to the geography of our access to the sea and the possibilities of Poland and the general situation international situation, you could try to compare the situation, but you cannot compare it to what we have now. Right now, we have a bigger potential, and we have much better structural security measures, and hence the responsibility that we're shouldering. We need to be talking about interests at sea, not exclusively at sea, of course. The threats in cyberspace, in the infospace, are there. They're all around us. This is because of how important cyberspace is for the life of the people in democratic countries. Social media have built a certain framework for us as societies, and others have exploited this space to influence consumer decisions, to obtain commercial secrets, and to build some set of information or influencing the state politically. So from this point of view, in this decision on the setting up of the Naval Academy, it shows you that the state thinks in a comprehensive way. We know why we need to be active in a domain. We need to know what interests we're protecting in that domain and what is the desired outcome. We have to be frank. We're not a superpower. We have to be realistic in a neoclassical way. We have to be able to influence the international system in line with our potential and in line with our interests. There's a question from the room. It's not a question as such, but since we are talking about the Navy and the sea, I'm Admiral Szubrych, the rector of the Naval Academy. A few comments about the sea. First comment is the 14th point of President Wilson talked about an independent Poland with access to the sea. That was a condition. According to the Americans, the condition, the precondition for having an independent country was securing access to the sea. When we're talking about the Second Republic and its achievement, how many people think about the central industrial region? No one talks about it. We're all talking about Gdynia. One of the key NGOs in the times of the Second Republic was the Maritime and Colonial League. How many people noticed that when we are talking about NATO, we are talking about North Atlantic Treaty? And North Atlantic is an ocean. When we are discussing the percentage of GDP which is spent on defense, how many people are aware that only naval ports bring 8% of GDP? So per annum, even if we look at 4% financing of if only 4% is spent on defense, Polish ports bring in 2 years of the spending. If we need to import gas and oil, it's going to arrive by sea. So the economic success of Poland has to be perceived through the security of maritime areas. And naval forces ensure the security at sea. And I'm not talking about the Navy only. As a representative of the Navy, I can tell you that even a huge number of Leopard 2 tanks will not secure naval maritime routes. So that's one of the elements that we need to keep in mind. And in Poland, we tend to forget that a country should have maritime stories. We need to be aware of the importance of the sea and the navy and maritime economy. I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about two more things. When we are talking about cybersecurity or disinformation, you have to remember that it's one of fashionable words, the asymmetry of conflict. In cyberspace, states that do not stand a chance in conflict with the superpowers. Imagine how long it would take if we had a conflict between North Korea and the US. In cyberspace, the economic potential, the economic growth doesn't matter that much. It's in the background. If you want to be active and very effective, you just need a big number of experts. And training experts is not as expensive as building infrastructure and equipping the armed forces. And they are just as effective, just as deadly for security and for the economy. But you cannot forget that if you only focus on cybersecurity, we're losing something. History shows that with the advent of the Air Force, everyone thought that air warfare is the war, the type of war. But we need different tools. Now, if we're talking about the fact that democracy is a pillar of security, one of the key elements here is that it's not just about the potential, but also the readiness to use the potential. The effective deterrent strategy says that deterrence and the possibility of use force is key. Are we, as democratic countries, can we define a border, a limit? If we introduce a deterrence strategy, can we, as societies, absorb the consequences of such a strategy? In democracy, from time to time, we, as the society, have a say. Are we ready to absorb the consequences of the strategy of the deterrence? Because only then our operations will be effective. Thank you very much.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much. Do we have anyone else?
Me the floor. My name is Juan Eduardo from the Chilean Embassy, but I would like to address a question, but on personal capacity. As has been said here quite correctly, humankind has been fighting war for centuries, on sea, land, and recently on air, and now we are certainly fighting on the cyberspace. Several experts talked today about hybrid wars, and we all know what's going on around us. So I want to make a very quick and brief question. Through this century, several techniques and mechanisms has been developed in order to fight those wars. What do you think about the possibility of a compulsory digital military draft? Because, of course, it takes a lot of time and resources to prepare and train an expert on IT security. And as I'm pretty sure Colonel knows very well, however, we have several fronts open at any given time. In basically each of our mobile phones today is a potential threat. Do you think it's time to start rethinking, for example, that sort of approach? We used to have it back in centuries ago, that compulsory military draft in order to have enough troops to defend. Now perhaps we do not need huge armies, but perhaps will be way useful, make the life easier for actual experts to have a sort of minimal foundation in digital security among our citizens as part of the, protecting and enhancing our democratic mechanisms. Thank you so much. Floor is back to you.
Okay, so thank you for your question, but because I am not let me say that I'm pretty sure that it will be best solution for all of us if I switch into Polish, because because maybe my English is more mine than English. So odpowiadając na to pytanie, myślę, że jest to jedno z
To respond to your question, I think it's one of the solutions that needs to be considered. Because our societies are better and better prepared to use state-of-the-art technology, particularly the digital natives, the youngest generations. They have been born into the world of smart devices. For this reason, this is a very good approach. However, I see a problem that we have at least 3 generations working side by side in any company. And the problem may be that not always these generations are able to communicate and understand one another. Our parents, well, they are not using social media, so there is no problem with that. Or they're using social media to a very small extent. My generation is probably the last generation that can use with a pencil and a recording tape. Our children are used to the modern technology. So we're getting closer to a situation where we could involve the general public, the society, in this joint defense of our interest. But we already heard about it today, and it has been implemented in the Nordic countries. We still have a few things to address. The issue of introducing the issue of disinformation into the education system, to the curricula. It needs to be very targeted, but only this way you can build a resilient society. And here we'll be able to rely on the experts from the civilian market. This approach is currently being implemented in Poland as part of the Territorial Defense Forces, the WOT. This is voluntary military service, and they have a cyber component. So it is a good direction, and I think it's going to be the only direction in the future, which will offer the possibility to build up resilience at the level of the entire society.
Bardzo dziękuję.
So thank you very much. Would anyone would like to make a contribution? Okay, so you can hear me now. Paweł Wilk, a lawyer. A question to the Colonel about the future of cyberspace defense. We know that cyberspace is very unique, as it requires a huge allocation of funds from the public and the private sector. So my question is the future of effective cyberspace defense will not be driven by coordination of funding and efforts between the civil and the public sector? I know it's a tricky question, and I think Admiral Schubrecht has raised this issue. When we are talking about spendings on defense, And compared to cybersecurity spending, investments in defense are much, much bigger. So that's the asymmetry we are able to achieve in cyberspace. And of course, the bigger commitment of the private, huge involvement and commitment of the private sector is essential, because when we are talking about resilience of the entire country, we can't rely on capabilities of armed forces alone, because the armed forces are not meant to ensure the security of the entire national economy. The armed forces are there to protect interests of the state in the event of a conflict. But resilience can be built if expenditure on cybersecurity will be proportionally made in many different areas, and one of those areas may be, and I think the state should be supporting such processes. In a moment, we will be implementing the NIS 2 directive, which will put some obligations on businesses and enterprises, but I don't think it's possible that the armed forces will take the responsibility, especially at such stage in times of peace, for the economy. The armed forces may take responsibility for selected areas which are vital for the national defense. So only critical areas of the economy may be taken into consideration by the armed forces. Is that sufficient? Yes, it is. Thank you very much. So right now, I would like to take stock of our discussions. So this morning, one of the leading journalists from a news channel invited the Minister of Digital Affairs for an interview, and during a brief interview we've heard a number of electrifying news, and I've seen that online there is very varied feedback. So this interview is reverberating. Some people argue that we've had too much this morning. Others are happy that eventually this information has been disclosed to the public. So the interview was dedicated to disinformation. Russian GRU has two teams specializing in attacks on Polish critical infrastructure and critical infrastructure beyond Poland. And there is another team which is specializing in disinformation. And what has struck me and reassured me was information that several days ago the Polish press agency was hacked to distribute disinformation in Poland, and fake news was published about draft in Poland, and it took us 4 minutes to take this information down. And I felt better, I felt reassured hearing that 4 minutes, this is how long dedicated forces needed to take down fake news. And Deputy Prime Minister thanked the media during his interview, and he said that their awareness and responsibility gave special services those 4 minutes essential to act. Fake news from the Polish press agency was not distributed, was not propagated, did not trigger panic, because it was swiftly eliminated. So thanking you for this discussion and exchange of information with the audience. I would like to focus on one word we were repeating many times today: being active, proactive. There are many things that are going on because citizens are acting. They are very active when they are evaluating, sharing information. Also active are politicians who won't be serving forever on current positions. And also active is democracy by definition, and we are proactive. So we have come together here to talk, to share our knowledge. You were keen to come here and listen, regardless on what level you're working professionally, whether you are a student, a young member of diplomatic corps, you may be at the cusp of your career, but you are still taking interest in things that are defining our reality. So I would like to thank you for taking part in our discussion. And before I give the floor to the host of this meeting, I would like to thank one very special person, Małgorzata Tydzińska, the head of Defense Committee, without whom this conference would look very different today. So thank you very much.
Szanowni Państwo, tak się...
Ladies and gentlemen, I was wondering how to briefly take stock of today's conference. Some say that I'm the champion of concise statements, but we have achieved a very unique atmosphere because we have moved from the 18th century. Speaker Grupiński reminded us today that it was in Poland where democracy in the 18th century was very much alive, and he referred to the Constitution of the 3rd of May. Keynote speakers today conveyed a very important message. The Ambassador Mark Brzezinski has sent a vital signal. It's a signal from the US administration he was representing, and the signal is very clear. Values that are close to democracy are guaranteed by the leader of the alliance, which in several days' time will be celebrating its 75th jubilee. And I'm very happy that later from Madam Minister or other panelists, we've had very powerful signals that indicate, and let me take stock of what has been said, that security issues and democracy must be seen and perceived holistically. And I would like to thank the Admiral who reminded us how important naval area is for all of us. And to be honest, if Navy takes key positions in Warsaw, the better it is for us, because and you are going to ensure more security in the sea than in Gdańsk-Gdynia. So this holistic approach to security, we've heard about it today. We've had the representatives of the government today who made a statement on security. that we also discussed the economy, which is the integral part of our country, which is the integral part of a safe country that is able to safeguard democracy. And there are many players who ensure internal security, and we've heard today that tanks are not most important because cybersecurity is the key. And I'm very happy that we've heard from diplomats that security is important, that security is important beyond borders. We've had about different alliances. The Undersecretary of State, Mr. Wziątek, has stressed it, its importance. And finally, we've heard an important question about the white public, about the awareness level of our society, which needs to be engaged in discussions about security. And we need to tap into its capabilities, because without the white public, the democracy may be a threat. As a retired general, it is fair for me to say that security will not be guaranteed by people wearing uniforms. Security may be guaranteed when everyone, as we are sitting here, as we are listening to what is said in this room, when we realize that we have an important contribution to make, when we are aware of different threats, and when we know how to counter those threats. So this is as brief conclusion as I could verbalize it. If I've omitted something or someone, it's because of the pressure of time. And last but not least, let me thank people who proper discussion, and I would like to thank all panelists who have accepted our invitation and moderators of today's panels. And I would like to thank my colleagues MPs who were so kind and took part in this very relevant meeting, very relevant for the Defense Committee. Of course, in cooperation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I would like to thank organizers of today's conference. I do apologize for mentioning names. I would like to thank Mirosława Zagłoba. Miła, thank you very much for bringing this event together. And I would like to thank Małgorzata, our secretary. We form a team which is working well for several months. Without her creativity, I don't think I would be able to be here today. I would like to thank our technical support and our interpreters who are sitting at the back. Thank you very much for facilitating our communication. And this is the end of my acknowledgements. This is the end of our conference today. Thank you very much for taking part in this conference in such great numbers.